Millionaire finds his ex-fiancée at the restaurant with 3 children identical to him. James Montgomery straightened his silk tie as he settled into his favorite corner table at the Garden Room, one of London's most prestigious restaurants. The soft amber lighting cast a warm glow across the crisp white tablecloth, and the gentle melody of classical guitar floated through the air. Tonight was meant to be a quiet celebration of his latest achievement, securing a $50 million contract for his construction company's most ambitious, sustainable building project yet. At 42, James had everything he'd ever dreamed of: a thriving business, a penthouse overlooking the Thames, and a reputation as one of Britain's most innovative property developers. Yet something had always felt missing, a void he'd never quite managed to fill with his professional accomplishments. The sommelier had just begun pouring a glass of vintage Bordeaux when movement near the entrance caught James's eye. His hand froze mid-air, wine glass untouched, as he watched a familiar figure being led to a table across the room. Even after 16 years, he would recognize Catherine Williams anywhere. Her chestnut hair was shorter now, styled in an elegant bob that framed her face, but her warm brown eyes and graceful manner remained unchanged. But it wasn't Catherine's presence alone that made James's heart skip a beat. Behind her followed 3 teenagers, all boys, all around 15 years old. As they settled into their seats, the similarities between them became apparent. They were clearly triplets. Yet it was something else about their appearance that sent a jolt of recognition through James's body. The first boy had James's strong jawline and the same way of furrowing his brow when concentrating on the menu. The second had inherited his mother's warm eyes, but James's distinctive nose and the habit of running his fingers through his hair when thinking. The third boy's profile was like looking at James's own teenage photographs. Time seemed to slow as James watched them interact. Catherine's gentle laugh, so familiar even after all these years, carried across the room as one of the boys made a joke. The way she looked at them, with such fierce pride and love, made something twist inside James's chest. His mind raced back to their university days, to their passionate romance that had seemed destined for forever. He remembered their plans, their dreams, and that final conversation when he'd received the job offer in London. Catherine had encouraged him to go, saying his talent for architectural design shouldn't be wasted. They'd agreed to take a break, to give each other space to pursue their careers. 2 weeks later, she'd stopped returning his calls, and eventually, he'd convinced himself it was for the best. The waiter approached James's table with his starter, but he barely noticed. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene before him. The boys were exactly the right age, their features, their mannerisms. It couldn't be coincidence. His hands began to tremble as the reality of what he was seeing crashed over him in waves. Just then, Catherine looked up, and their eyes met across the crowded restaurant. The color drained from her face, and for a moment they were frozen in time. 16 years of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. The boys, noticing their mother's sudden stillness, turned to follow her gaze. James found himself standing, though he had no memory of making the decision to do so. His legs felt wooden as he took a step toward their table, drawn by an invisible force he couldn't resist. The gentle strumming of the classical guitar seemed to fade away, replaced by the thundering of his own heartbeat in his ears. Catherine slowly rose from her chair, her composure remarkable despite the circumstances. "James," she said softly, his name carrying 16 years of weight, "I suppose we have some catching up to do." The boys looked between their mother and this stranger, with growing curiosity, perhaps already sensing that their birthday dinner was about to become something far more significant. James struggled to find his voice, his eyes moving from Catherine to each of the boys in turn, seeing himself reflected in their features with stunning clarity. "Catherine," he managed finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think we do." The maitre d' appeared at Catherine's elbow, concerned by the unexpected tableau unfolding in his restaurant. Catherine turned to him with a gentle smile. "Would it be possible to join our tables together?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It seems we have a rather important family reunion to attend to." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and careful conversations. James learned that the boys were named Alexander, Benjamin and Christopher, Alex, Ben and Chris as they preferred to be called. They sat around the expanded table, an awkward family portrait in the making, while the restaurant's other patrons pretended not to notice the emotional drama unfolding in their midst. The boys, to their credit, handled the situation with remarkable composure. Alex, the oldest by 4 minutes, possessed a quiet intensity that reminded James of himself at that age. Ben, the middle triplet, had an artist's eye and kept sketching on his napkin, a habit James had never quite outgrown himself. Chris, the youngest, asked thoughtful questions with a diplomatic grace that must have come from Catherine. "We're here celebrating their 15th birthday," Catherine explained, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her water glass. "I had no idea you still came here. I closed a deal today," James replied, his voice hoarse. "I always celebrate important moments here." He paused, the irony of the situation not lost on him. "Though I suspect this evening will be memorable for entirely different reasons." Catherine reached into her handbag and withdrew 3 sealed envelopes, each bearing one of the boys' names in her elegant handwriting. "I've been carrying these for months now," she admitted. "I wrote them when the boys turned 15, planning to give them tonight. They explain everything." The boys accepted the letters with varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension. Alex held his with steady hands, while Ben turned his over and over, examining the paper's texture. Chris simply stared at his name written in his mother's familiar script. "May we read them now?" Alex asked, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone James often used in board meetings. Catherine nodded, and for several minutes the only sounds were the rustle of paper and the continued soft strains of guitar music. James watched their faces as they read, seeing the moment of recognition dawn in each pair of eyes. His own hands gripped his knees beneath the table, knuckles white with tension. "You're our father," Ben stated finally, looking up from his letter with eyes that mirrored James's own. It wasn't a question. "I am," James confirmed, his voice thick with emotion, "though I'm just learning this myself tonight." "Mom found out she was expecting 2 weeks after you left for London," Chris added, his analytical mind already piecing together the timeline. "She didn't want to hold you back from your dreams." Catherine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Your father had just received an incredible opportunity," she explained, looking at each of her sons in turn. "He had such talent, such vision for sustainable architecture. I couldn't bear the thought of him giving that up." "So you raised us alone instead?" Alex's question carried a hint of challenge, protective of his mother. "I made that choice," Catherine said firmly. "Your father didn't abandon us, he never knew about you. That responsibility is mine alone." James felt as though he were watching his life reshape itself before his eyes. Every memory of the past 16 years took on new meaning, colored by the knowledge of what he'd missed. First steps, first words, first days of school, all moments he should have shared. The waiter approached tentatively with their main courses, breaking the tension. As he served the dishes, including James's untouched starter, the family fell into an easier rhythm of conversation. The boys, their initial shock wearing off, began asking questions about James's work. "Do you design sustainable buildings?" Ben asked, his interest clearly piqued. He pulled out his phone and quickly searched for James's company. "Wait, you designed the Living Garden Tower in Manchester? That's brilliant. The vertical gardens are incredible." "I did," James confirmed, watching as his son scrolled through images of his work with obvious enthusiasm. "It's part of our commitment to green architecture. Every building should give something back to the environment." "That's actually quite similar to Mum's work," Chris observed, glancing between his parents. "She's an environmental management consultant for multinational corporations." James turned to Catherine with newfound admiration. "You went into environmental work?" She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I completed my master's in environmental management while raising the boys. It wasn't easy, but it taught me a lot about multitasking and efficiency. Now I help companies reduce their environmental impact and develop sustainable practices." As they continued talking, James noticed how the boys seamlessly wove between topics, showing interest in both their mother's and father's fields. Their questions were intelligent and thoughtful, revealing minds that had been well nurtured and encouraged to think critically. The evening stretched on, none of them wanting it to end. Finally, Catherine glanced at her watch and sighed. "It's getting late, and it's still a school night." The boys began to protest, but James held up his hand. "Your mother's right," he said, surprising himself with how natural the paternal tone felt. "But perhaps we could do this again? Soon?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to Catherine, who smiled softly. "I think that would be good for everyone," she agreed. "We have 16 years to catch up on, after all." The following weeks brought a flurry of carefully orchestrated meetings and dinners. James found himself rearranging his typically rigid schedule to accommodate weekend brunches and after-school visits. The garden room became their unofficial meeting spot, the staff now greeting them with knowing smiles as they gathered in what they'd come to think of as their family corner. During one particularly memorable evening, Alex surprised everyone by presenting a detailed analysis of his father's latest project's environmental impact. "I've been studying your company's sustainability reports," he explained, pulling up spreadsheets on his tablet. "Your green initiatives are impressive, but I think there's room for even more innovation in water conservation." James leaned forward, genuinely intrigued by his son's insights. "Go on," he encouraged, noting how Alex's eyes lit up with the same passion he felt when discussing his projects. "Well, if you implemented a grey water recycling system combined with rainwater harvesting, you could reduce water consumption by an additional 30%. Alex's fingers flew across the screen as he pulled up supporting data. "I've calculated the potential savings, both environmental and financial." Catherine watched the exchange with quiet pride. "Alex has always had a head for numbers and environmental science," she explained. "He's already talking about studying environmental engineering at university." Meanwhile, Ben had been sketching throughout the conversation, his pencil moving swiftly across his sketchpad. He turned it around to reveal a remarkable architectural rendering of one of James's buildings, but with subtle modifications that integrated even more natural elements into the design. "The current design is brilliant," Ben said, pointing to specific areas of his sketch. "But what if we extended the green spaces to create continuous vertical gardens? It would provide natural insulation and support local biodiversity." James studied the sketch, impressed by both the technical skill and the innovative thinking behind it. "This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking design we need in sustainable architecture," he said, his voice thick with pride. "Have you considered architecture as a career?" Ben nodded enthusiastically. "I've been researching architectural programs since I was 12. Mum's taken us to see lots of innovative buildings across Europe. She always said it was important to understand how good design can impact the environment." Chris, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "What if you combined both ideas?" he suggested, his diplomatic nature shining through. Alex's water conservation system could support Ben's expanded gardens, creating a truly self-sustaining ecosystem within the building. Catherine and James exchanged glances, both recognizing how their children had inherited the best of both parents' abilities. The boys continued brainstorming, their excitement building as they bounced ideas off each other. "You've done an amazing job with them," James said quietly to Catherine as the boys debated the merits of different sustainable materials. "They're extraordinary." Catherine smiled softly. "They've always pushed each other to excel, but they support each other too. It wasn't always easy, but watching them grow into who they are has been the greatest joy of my life." As their meal progressed, James found himself sharing stories about his early career struggles and triumphs. He described the challenges of promoting sustainable architecture when it wasn't yet mainstream, and how he'd fought to prove that environmental responsibility and profitability could go hand in hand. "That must have been around the time you started your own consultancy," Chris noted, looking at his mother. "Did you face similar challenges?" Catherine nodded, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "Yes, it was difficult convincing companies that environmental management was crucial for their future success. But times were changing, and more businesses were beginning to understand the importance of sustainability. It seems we were working towards similar goals all along," James observed, just from different angles. The evening wrapped up with plans for their next meeting, this time at James's office, where the boys could see firsthand how sustainable building projects came together. As they prepared to leave, Ben handed his father the sketch he'd made earlier. "Keep it," he said with a shy smile. "Maybe some of these ideas could work in your next project." James carefully tucked the sketch into his portfolio, treating it with the same reverence he would a professional architectural rendering. "I think they just might," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of possibilities yet to come. As they walked out into the cool London evening, James couldn't help but marvel at how quickly his life had transformed. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a successful but solitary figure, focused solely on building structures of steel and glass. Now he was learning to build something far more precious: relationships with his children. Catherine sat in her office at Environmental Solutions International, reviewing the proposal she'd been crafting for weeks. The afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the numerous sustainability awards adorning her walls. Her computer screen displayed a comprehensive plan for expanding James's construction company internationally, with a focus on environmental innovation. She hadn't planned this. When she'd first reconnected with James, her only concern had been ensuring their sons had the opportunity to know their father. But as she'd watched him interact with the boys, observed his passion for sustainable construction, and noted how his company's values aligned with her own expertise, an idea had begun to take shape. The soft chime of her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was a message from James. "The boys showed me some remarkable insights today at the office. Alex's environmental impact calculations are spot on, Ben's designs are innovative, and Chris has a natural talent for project management. They've inherited the best of both of us." Catherine smiled, remembering how the boys had come home buzzing with excitement after their visit to their father's office. They'd spent hours discussing everything they'd learned, each viewing the experience through their unique perspectives. Her intercom buzzed, and her assistant's voice came through. "Ms. Williams, your conference call with Singapore is in 5 minutes." "Thank you, Sarah," Catherine replied, gathering her thoughts. As she prepared for the call, she couldn't help but notice how her professional life was beginning to intertwine with the new family dynamic they were building. Later that evening, at their usual table in the garden room, Catherine finally shared her vision with James. The boys were at home, giving their parents a rare opportunity to discuss matters privately. "I've been analyzing your company's international potential," she began, pulling out her tablet. "With my expertise in global environmental management and your innovative approach to sustainable construction, we could create something extraordinary." James listened intently as Catherine outlined her proposal. Her presentation was meticulous, covering everything from market analysis to regulatory requirements in various countries. She'd even identified potential projects that would benefit from their combined expertise. "The environmental consulting division of my firm could seamlessly integrate with your construction company," she explained. "We could offer comprehensive sustainable building solutions, from initial environmental impact assessments to final construction and ongoing management." "This is brilliant," James said, studying the projections she'd prepared. "But what about the boys? How would this affect them?" Catherine's eyes sparkled. "That's the best part. We could structure their involvement during school holidays, creating a formal mentorship program. They're already showing such interest and aptitude in both our fields." As they discussed the possibilities, their conversation shifted between professional planning and parental pride. They talked about Alex's talent for environmental analysis, Ben's architectural gift, and Chris's natural ability to see the bigger picture. "We could create something truly meaningful," Catherine said softly. "Not just for us, but for them as well. A legacy that combines both our life's work." James reached across the table, taking her hand in a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "I've missed so much of their lives," he said quietly. "But perhaps this is our chance to build something together, something that will give them a foundation for their futures." The waiter approached with their desserts, a chocolate soufflé for Catherine and treacle tart for James, just as they'd ordered during their university days. Some habits, it seemed, never changed. "There's something else," Catherine added, her voice carrying a note of excitement. "I've been invited to speak at the International Sustainable Building Conference in Geneva next month. It would be an ideal opportunity to launch our collaboration." James's eyes lit up with interest. The timing would be perfect. We are just finishing the Living Garden Tower project, and the international attention it's receiving could help establish our global presence. As they continued planning, their professional expertise complementing each other just as it had during their university days, both Catherine and James realized that perhaps their paths had never truly diverged. They'd simply taken different routes to arrive at the same destination. The evening ended with a sense of possibility hanging in the air. They had sketched out the beginnings of a plan that would not only merge their professional lives, but would also create opportunities for their sons to develop their talents and interests. As they prepared to leave, Catherine paused. "Do you think we're moving too fast?" she asked, her practical nature asserting itself. James shook his head, a warm smile playing at his lips. "I think we've waited 16 years for this moment. Perhaps it's time to make up for lost time in every way possible." The International Sustainable Building Conference in Geneva buzzed with energy as industry leaders from around the world gathered to discuss the future of green construction. Catherine stood backstage, reviewing her presentation notes one final time. In the audience, James sat with the boys, who had convinced their school to count this as an educational experience. "Representing our next speaker, from Environmental Solutions International," the announcer's voice filled the auditorium. "Please welcome Catherine Williams, speaking on the future of integrated environmental management in construction." Catherine walked onto the stage with practiced confidence, her presentation displaying behind her. As she began speaking, her eyes found her family in the audience. Alex sat forward, tablet ready to take notes. Ben was already sketching in his notebook, while Chris watched with keen interest, occasionally whispering observations to his father. "The future of sustainable construction lies not in isolated green initiatives," Catherine began, "but in fully integrated environmental management systems that consider every aspect of a building's impact from conception to completion and beyond." She proceeded to outline her vision, using James's Living Garden Tower as a case study. The project had already garnered international attention for its innovative approach to sustainable urban development. As she spoke, she could see heads nodding in agreement throughout the audience. "Today, I'm excited to announce a groundbreaking partnership," Catherine continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Environmental Solutions International will be joining forces with Montgomery Sustainable Developments to create a new standard in green construction worldwide." The announcement created a ripple of excited murmurs through the audience. James smiled proudly from his seat, while the boys exchanged knowing grins. They had helped their parents prepare for this moment, spending evenings around the dinner table discussing strategies and possibilities. After the presentation, the conference hall buzzed with interest. Potential clients and partners approached Catherine and James, eager to learn more about their unified vision. The boys found themselves drawn into conversations as well, their unique perspectives and understanding of both parents' work, impressing the industry professionals. "Your sons seem remarkably well versed in sustainable construction," remarked a prominent Swiss developer, after an enlightening conversation with Alex about water conservation systems. "They've grown up with it," Catherine replied proudly, "though some aspects seem to run in the family." Later that evening, the family gathered in the hotel's rooftop restaurant overlooking Lake Geneva. The city lights sparkled on the water, creating a magical atmosphere for their celebration. "I'd say that went rather well," James said, raising his glass in a toast. "The response has been overwhelming." "Did you see the Saudi delegation's reaction when Ben showed them his modified designs?" Chris asked, excitement evident in his voice. "They're seriously interested in implementing those changes in their new Eco-City project." And Alex's presentation of the environmental impact data really sealed the deal with the German investors, Catherine added, beaming with pride. Ben pulled out his sketchpad, already working on new ideas inspired by the day's discussions. "I've been thinking about how we could adapt the vertical garden system for different climates," he said, his pencil moving swiftly across the paper. "We'll need to consider water usage variations in different regions," Alex added, pulling up climate data on his tablet. "The system that works in London might need significant modifications for Dubai." James watched his sons collaborate, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. "You know," he said to Catherine, "when I came to that dinner at the garden room 2 months ago, I never imagined this is where we'd end up." Catherine smiled softly. "Sometimes life has a way of bringing things full circle. Though I must admit, I hadn't planned on our family reunion turning into an international business venture." "Speaking of business," Chris interjected, looking up from his notepad, "have you considered how we'll structure the international mentorship program? If we're going to be involved during school holidays, we should have a formal framework in place." The parents exchanged amused glances at their son's practical approach. "Already working on it," James assured him. "Your mother and I have been developing a structured program that will allow each of you to explore your interests while gaining practical experience." As the evening progressed, their conversation flowed easily between family matters and business plans. The lines between personal and professional life began to blur, creating something new and unprecedented, a family business in the truest sense of the word. The first real test of their new family dynamic came during the summer holidays. The boys had officially joined their parents' newly merged company as interns, each focusing on their areas of interest while learning the broader aspects of the business. The Living Garden Tower project in Manchester served as their training ground. Alex spent his mornings with the environmental assessment team, analyzing data and suggesting improvements to the building's resource management systems. His afternoons were dedicated to developing new sustainability metrics that would become standard for all future projects. Ben worked closely with the architectural team, his creative ideas bringing fresh perspectives to established designs. His talent for visualizing environmental solutions in architectural terms proved invaluable as they prepared proposals for new international projects. Chris, with his diplomatic nature and keen understanding of both the technical and human aspects of the business, found himself naturally gravitating toward project management. He excelled at coordinating between different departments and ensuring everyone's voices were heard. One particularly warm afternoon, the family gathered in James's office for their weekly project review. The space had been redesigned to accommodate their new working arrangement, with a large conference table replacing the formal desk that had once dominated the room. The Singapore developers were particularly impressed with our integrated approach, Catherine reported, pulling up the latest correspondence on the large screen. They're interested in implementing our complete sustainable building management system in their new eco-business park. That's brilliant news, James responded before turning to Alex. How are the environmental impact projections coming along? Alex pulled up his latest analysis. I've completed the initial assessments. Given Singapore's climate and resource availability, we can actually improve on the efficiency ratings we achieved in Manchester. I've identified several areas where we can optimize the system further. Ben spread out his latest designs on the table. I've been working on adapting the vertical garden system for the tropical climate, he explained, pointing to detailed sketches. We can incorporate native species that will thrive in the local environment while providing natural cooling for the building. The local authorities are particularly interested in the water conservation aspects, Chris added, reviewing his notes from recent meetings. I've been in touch with their environmental department, and they're willing to fast-track approval if we can meet their enhanced sustainability requirements. Catherine watched proudly as her sons presented their work. The boys had always been close, but seeing them work together professionally added a new dimension to their relationship. Their different strengths and perspectives combined to create something greater than the sum of its parts. James stood by the window, looking out over the London skyline. You know, he said thoughtfully, when I first started this company, I dreamed of changing the way we think about sustainable construction, but I never imagined it would become a true family enterprise. Neither did I, Catherine admitted, joining him at the window. When I decided to pursue environmental management, I was just trying to create a better world for our boys. Now they're helping us do that on a global scale. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office as they continued their meeting, discussing strategies and sharing ideas. The boys moved seamlessly between their roles as children and professionals, their natural enthusiasm tempered by growing expertise. We should celebrate, Chris suggested as they wrapped up the meeting. It's been exactly 3 months since the Geneva conference, and look how far we've come. The garden room, Ben asked with a grin, already knowing the answer. Where else? Alex replied, gathering his materials. It's practically our boardroom now anyway. As they prepared to leave the office, Catherine noticed James lingering behind, looking at a framed photograph on the wall. It was a new addition, a picture of all 5 of them at the Geneva conference, their first official family business portrait. Sometimes I still can't believe how much my life has changed in just a few months, he said softly as she approached. Catherine touched his arm gently. We've all changed, but I think we're building something remarkable, in more ways than one. That evening, as they settled into their usual table at the garden room, surrounded by the familiar sounds of gentle guitar music and the aroma of fine cuisine, they were more than just a family celebrating success. They were partners in an enterprise that bridged the gap between their past and future, creating a legacy that would extend far beyond their individual dreams. As autumn painted London's parks in shades of gold and amber, the newly merged company faced its first real challenge. The Singapore Eco-Business Park project had hit unexpected complications, requiring all hands on deck to address the issues. James paced his office, phone pressed to his ear as he discussed the situation with local contractors. The problems were technical in nature. The soil composition at the construction site was different from initial surveys, requiring significant adjustments to their foundation plans. "Dad," Ben called from his workspace in the corner, where he'd been sketching alternative designs during his after-school hours. "I think I might have a solution." He spread out a series of drawings on the conference table, pointing to modified foundation plans that would work with the actual soil conditions while maintaining the building's green features. James ended his call and studied the drawings. "This is brilliant," he said, amazement evident in his voice. "How did you come up with this?" "I've been studying tropical architecture," Ben explained, pulling up research on his tablet. "There are traditional building techniques in Southeast Asia that deal with similar soil conditions. I've just adapted them to modern construction methods." At that moment, Catherine arrived with Alex and Chris in tow, all three carrying stacks of environmental impact reports. "The local environmental authority needs updated assessments based on the soil situation," she explained, setting down her papers. Alex immediately pulled up his laptop. "I've already started running new calculations," he said, fingers flying across the keyboard. "The modified foundation design will actually improve our water management capabilities. Look at these numbers." Chris, ever the mediator, was already drafting emails to various stakeholders. "We should arrange a video conference with the Singapore team," he suggested. "If we present these solutions together, it will show them we're taking a comprehensive approach to solving the problem." The family worked late into the evening, ordering dinner to the office from their favorite Indian restaurant. As they ate between bouts of problem-solving, Catherine couldn't help but marvel at how naturally they'd fallen into their roles. "You know," she said, watching the boys collaborate on a presentation for the Singapore clients, "this wasn't quite what I had in mind when I suggested the mentorship program." James smiled, passing her a container of curry. "They're exceeding all expectations, though I do worry we're asking too much of them sometimes." "We want to help," Chris said, looking up from his laptop. "This isn't just your company anymore, it's our family's legacy. Besides," Alex added, "these are real-world problems we're solving. It's better than any textbook learning." Ben nodded in agreement, still sketching refinements to his design. "And we're still maintaining our grades. We've actually gotten better at managing our time since starting here." Catherine and James exchanged proud glances. Their children had risen to the challenge with a maturity that constantly surprised them. Later that night, as they finally prepared to head home, James found himself alone with Catherine in his office. The boys had gone ahead to pack up their things. "Do you ever regret not telling me sooner?" he asked quietly, the question that had lingered unspoken between them for months. Catherine was silent for a moment, considering her answer carefully. "I regret that you missed so many moments," she finally replied. "But looking at how things have worked out, how the boys have blossomed since meeting you, how our professional lives have aligned so perfectly, perhaps everything happened exactly when it was meant to." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "They're remarkable, Catherine. You did an amazing job raising them. And now we get to guide them together," she said softly. "Though sometimes I think they're teaching us as much as we're teaching them." The sound of the boys' laughter drifted in from the outer office, and both parents smiled. Despite the stress of the Singapore project, despite the long hours and complex problems, they were building something extraordinary, not just in terms of sustainable architecture, but in terms of family bonds and shared purpose. As they joined their sons, ready to head home for the night, Catherine's phone buzzed with an email from Singapore. The clients were impressed with their quick response to the situation, and especially interested in Ben's innovative foundation design. The project was back on track, stronger than before. The success of the Singapore project marked a turning point for Montgomery Williams Environmental Developments, as the merged company had come to be known. Industry publications began featuring articles about their innovative approach to sustainable construction and their unique family dynamic. One crisp November morning, the family gathered at the garden room for what had become their traditional Sunday brunch. The restaurant had reserved their usual table permanently, complete with extra space for the boys' laptops and Ben's ever-present sketchbooks. The article in Architecture Today came out, Chris announced, pulling up the digital edition on his tablet. They're calling us the first family of sustainable construction. Catherine nearly choked on her tea. That's a bit dramatic, isn't it? But accurate, Alex said, scanning the article. Listen to this. The Montgomery Williams family has revolutionized the approach to sustainable architecture by combining cutting-edge design with comprehensive environmental management, creating a new standard for green construction worldwide. James smiled, watching his family's reactions. They're not wrong. What we're doing here is unprecedented. Ben looked up from his latest sketch, a design for their newest project in Dubai. It's strange to think that just 6 months ago we didn't even know each other, he said thoughtfully. Now we're not just a family, we're changing the industry together. The waiter arrived with their usual orders: eggs Benedict for James and Catherine, French toast for Ben, avocado toast for Alex, and a full English breakfast for Chris. They'd been coming here so regularly that the staff knew their preferences by heart. We've received another invitation, Catherine mentioned between bites. The World Green Building Council wants us to deliver the keynote address at their annual conference, all 5 of us. The boys exchanged excited glances. Public speaking together had become one of their strengths, each bringing their unique perspective to their presentations. Perfect timing, Chris noted. It's during our winter holiday, so we won't miss any school. Speaking of school, James began carefully, your headmaster called yesterday. He wanted to discuss creating a special curriculum track based on your work with the company. Apparently, other students are showing interest in sustainable development careers after hearing about what you're doing. Alex's eyes lit up. That could be brilliant. We could help develop course materials based on real-world applications and maybe set up internship programs for other students, Ben added enthusiastically. Catherine watched her sons brainstorm ideas, their passion for sharing knowledge reminding her of their father's teaching assistant days at university. Some traits, it seemed, ran deep in the family. You know what this means, don't you? Chris said suddenly, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. We're going to need a bigger office. Everyone laughed, but James nodded seriously. Actually, I've been thinking about that. What if we created something more than just an office, a center for sustainable development, education and innovation? With demonstration gardens and experimental building systems, Ben chimed in, already reaching for his sketchbook. We could include research facilities for testing new environmental management techniques, Alex added, and training spaces for students and industry professionals, Chris concluded. Catherine sat back, watching her family plan their next venture. The boys had inherited James's vision and her practical approach to environmental issues, creating a perfect blend of innovation and feasibility. As the morning stretched into afternoon, their brunch plates long cleared away, they continued developing their ideas. The restaurant's gentle background music and familiar atmosphere had become the backdrop to their family's evolving story. Sometimes I wonder, James said softly to Catherine, as they watched the boys debate the merits of different sustainable building materials, what would have happened if I hadn't been at the restaurant that night? Catherine squeezed his hand under the table. I believe some things are meant to be. We just had to wait for the right moment. Looking at their sons, Alex analyzing data on his laptop, Ben sketching building designs, and Chris coordinating their ideas into a cohesive plan, they knew they were witnessing something special. They weren't just building sustainable structures, they were building a sustainable future, both for their family and for the planet. The World Green Building Council conference in Vancouver marked another milestone for the Montgomery Williams family. The vast auditorium was packed with industry leaders from around the world, eager to hear from the family that had revolutionized sustainable construction. Standing backstage, Catherine adjusted Ben's tie while James helped Alex with his presentation notes. Chris was already peeking through the curtain, assessing the audience with his usual analytical eye. Largest turnout they've ever had, Chris reported, turning back to his family. And look at the delegation list. We've got representatives from every continent. No pressure then, Ben quipped, though his hands shook slightly as he straightened his already perfect tie. James placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. Just remember, we're sharing our story, and it's a good one. As they walked onto the stage together, the applause was thunderous. The sight of the family standing united parents and children working together to reshape the future of sustainable construction, had captured the world's imagination. Catherine began their presentation, describing how their unique family circumstances had led to an unprecedented business model. James followed, explaining how combining their expertise had created new possibilities in sustainable architecture. Then came the boys' turn. Alex stepped forward first, presenting their revolutionary environmental management systems with confidence. By integrating traditional ecological knowledge with cutting-edge technology, he explained, we've created buildings that don't just minimize environmental impact, they actively contribute to ecosystem restoration. Ben followed, his architectural visualizations drawing gasps of appreciation from the audience. Our designs prove that sustainability and aesthetic beauty aren't mutually exclusive, and he said, showcasing their latest projects. Every building tells a story of harmony between human innovation and natural systems. Chris concluded their presentation, discussing the broader implications of their work. We're not just building structures, he stated clearly. We're building a framework for future generations to continue this vital work. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Later that evening, at a quiet restaurant overlooking Vancouver's harbour, the family celebrated their success. The winter sun had set early, and the city lights sparkled on the water like stars. I received 12 partnership proposals today, Catherine mentioned, sipping her wine. Everyone wants to be part of what we're building. Speaking of building, James added, pulling out his tablet, the Dubai project is proceeding ahead of schedule. The local authorities are so impressed with our water conservation systems that they're considering making them mandatory for all new construction in the region. Alex beamed with pride. The water systems had been largely his design, refined through countless hours of research and testing. The data from the Singapore project really helped optimize the design for desert conditions. Ben had been quietly sketching throughout dinner, inspired by the Vancouver skyline. I've been thinking, he said, turning his sketchbook around. What if we applied our principles to renovation projects? There are so many existing buildings that could be transformed into sustainable spaces. That's brilliant, Chris exclaimed, already considering the logistics. It would open up entirely new markets, especially in historic cities where new construction is limited. Catherine and James exchanged proud glances. In moments like these, they could hardly believe how far they'd come in less than a year. You know what's remarkable, Catherine said softly. None of this would have happened if we hadn't all come together at exactly the right moment. The garden room has a lot to answer for, James replied with a smile. The boys groaned good-naturedly at their parents' sentimentality, but there was no denying the truth in their words. Their chance reunion had sparked something extraordinary, a revolution in sustainable construction driven by family bonds as much as professional expertise. As they continued their dinner, discussing plans and possibilities, a message arrived from London. Their proposal for the Sustainable Development Education Centre had been approved by the City Council. Construction could begin as soon as they returned. Perfect timing, Chris said, pulling up the project timeline on his tablet. We can incorporate everything we've learned from these international projects into the design. And create something truly unprecedented, Ben added, already modifying his sketches to include new ideas. A place where the next generation can learn how to build a sustainable future, Alex concluded. James and Catherine watched their sons collaborate, marveling at how naturally they balanced their individual strengths with teamwork. The boys had grown so much in the past year, not just in their professional capabilities, but in their understanding of themselves and each other. Back in London, the new year brought fresh challenges and opportunities. The Sustainable Development Education Centre project had captured the public's imagination, with media outlets dubbing it the Greenhouse of Knowledge. The family gathered in their expanded office space, now occupying an entire floor of their sustainably retrofitted building in central London. The walls were covered with Ben's designs, Alex's environmental impact studies, and Chris's project management charts. The applications for the first student program are overwhelming, Catherine announced during their morning meeting. We've received interest from schools across Europe. And the professional development courses are fully booked for the first 6 months, Chris added, reviewing the registration data. We've had to start a waiting list. Alex looked up from his computer, where he'd been analyzing the center's projected environmental impact. The building itself will be a teaching tool, he explained enthusiastically. Every system we've developed, every innovation we've created, will be accessible for students to study and understand. Ben spread out his latest designs across the conference table. I've incorporated viewing corridors and interactive displays throughout the structure, he said, pointing to various sections of the plans. Visitors will be able to see exactly how sustainable systems work in real time. James studied the designs with pride. This is more than just a building, he observed. It's a legacy. The winter sun streamed through their office windows, illuminating the family as they worked together. Catherine watched her sons, noting how much they'd matured over the past year. They'd grown into their roles naturally, their individual talents strengthening the family enterprise while developing their own unique identities. We should document this, Chris suggested suddenly. The whole journey, from that first dinner at the garden room to now. It could inspire other families to work together for positive change. Speaking of the garden room, Catherine interjected, checking her watch, we have a reservation for lunch. Special occasion, remember? The boys exchanged knowing smiles. It was the anniversary of that fateful night when their father had first discovered their existence. As they settled into their familiar table at the restaurant, the gentle guitar music playing in the background, just as it had that first evening, James raised his glass in a toast. To second chances, he said softly, looking at his family with pride. And to sustainable futures, Catherine added, her eyes meeting his with understanding. Both architectural and familial, Chris chimed in, ever the wordsmith. Ben had already pulled out his sketchbook, capturing the moment in quick, sure strokes. Alex was calculating something on his phone, probably the restaurant's energy efficiency, knowing him. You know, James said, looking around at his family, when I started my company, I thought I was building something important. But this family, this legacy we're creating together, it's beyond anything I could have imagined. Catherine smiled, remembering the young university students they'd once been, sharing dreams over late-night study sessions. Sometimes the best foundations are built on unexpected ground, she said softly. The boys groaned at their parents' sentimentality, but their smiles were genuine. They understood the significance of this moment, this place, this family they'd become. As their lunch arrived, they naturally fell into discussion about the education center's progress, their international projects, and their plans for the future. The conversation flowed easily between professional matters and family jokes, business strategies, and personal achievements. Looking around their table, at Ben sketching new ideas, Alex analyzing data, Chris coordinating plans, and their parents offering guidance and support, it was clear that they'd built something extraordinary. Not just a successful business, but a family united by purpose and passion. The gentle strains of guitar music filled the air, just as it had on that first night, but now it was the soundtrack to a family's shared journey, not a solitary businessman's dinner. They had transformed not just the future of sustainable construction, but their own futures as well. As the afternoon light filtered through the restaurant's windows, casting a warm glow over their familiar table, they continued planning, dreaming, and building together. The garden room had become more than just a restaurant. It was the foundation stone of their family's legacy, a legacy built on sustainable principles, both in architecture and in love. Spring had returned to London, and with it came the grand opening of the Montgomery Williams Centre for Sustainable Development. The building itself was a testament to everything the family had achieved together, a perfect blend of innovative architecture, environmental responsibility, and educational purpose. The morning of the opening ceremony, the family arrived early to walk through the completed building together. Sunlight streamed through the vast windows, creating patterns on the living walls that Ben had designed. The air was fresh and clean, thanks to Alex's advanced filtration systems, and Chris's carefully planned layout made the space feel both professional and welcoming. Remember when we first discussed this idea over brunch? Ben asked, running his hand along one of the interactive display panels that showcased their global projects. It seemed almost impossible then. Most good things start that way, James replied, watching as maintenance staff tended to the vertical gardens that had become their signature feature. Just like our family. Catherine stood in the central atrium where a wall of photographs told their story, from their early projects to their international successes. The first student groups arrive next week, she said, checking her tablet. We've had to create a waiting list for the next 3 terms. Alex was monitoring the building's systems on his laptop, making final adjustments to ensure everything would run perfectly. "All environmental metrics are exceeding our projections," he reported proudly. "We're actually generating more clean energy than we use." Chris emerged from the lecture hall, where he'd been overseeing the final preparations for the opening ceremony. "The press is starting to arrive," he announced. "And you won't believe who just confirmed their attendance, the dean from our old university." Catherine and James exchanged surprised glances. "The same one who taught our environmental engineering class?" Catherine asked. "The very same," Chris confirmed. He said he wouldn't miss seeing his former student's greatest achievement. As guests began to arrive, the family took their positions to greet them. Industry leaders, environmental activists, educators, and students all filled the spectacular space, their excited conversations echoing through the atrium. The dean found them just before the ceremony was set to begin. "I always knew you two were meant for great things," he said, looking between Catherine and James, "though I must admit I never imagined anything quite like this." He turned to the boys with a warm smile. "And you three, you're the perfect combination of your parents' talents." The opening ceremony itself was a celebration, not just of the building, but of the journey that had brought them there. Each family member spoke, sharing their perspective on what they'd built together. James began. "A year ago, I thought I knew what success looked like. I had built a company, created innovative buildings, made a name for myself in sustainable architecture. But I was missing the most important thing, family." Catherine continued. "We often talk about sustainable development in terms of meeting present needs without compromising the future. What we've created here goes beyond that. It's about building a better future through understanding, innovation, and collaboration." The boys each took their turn, speaking about their specific contributions and their vision for the center's future. As they concluded, the audience rose in a standing ovation, moved by the family's evident passion and unity of purpose. Later that afternoon, as the celebrations continued around them, the family found a quiet moment together in James's office within the center. The space offered a perfect view of London's skyline, now dotted with more and more green buildings, many of them their own designs. "I found something interesting while we were preparing for today," Chris said, pulling out an old newspaper article. "It's from 16 years ago, about Dad's first sustainable building project." "I remember that," James said, taking the yellowed paper. "It was a small office building, but it was revolutionary for its time." "Read the last paragraph," Chris urged. James read aloud. "Montgomery's innovative approach to sustainable construction suggests a future where buildings not only serve human needs, but actively contribute to environmental restoration. One can only imagine what the next generation might achieve with such foundations." The family fell silent, letting the words sink in. They had indeed built on those foundations, creating something far beyond what any of them could have achieved alone. "We should frame this," Ben suggested. "Hang it next to our family photo in the atrium." "Speaking of family photos," Alex added with a grin, "isn't it time we headed to the garden room? We have a tradition to maintain, after all." The garden room had outdone itself for the evening, setting their usual table with extra care. Gentle guitar music filled the air, just as it had on that fateful night 17 months ago, when their lives had changed forever. "It feels like yesterday," Catherine mused, looking around at her family. "That night when you all walked in, not knowing what was about to happen. And now look at us," Chris said, gesturing to the magazine on the table. Their family featured on the cover of International Architecture Review, under the headline, "The Future of Sustainable Development, a Family Legacy." The waiter brought their usual orders without needing to ask, along with a special bottle of champagne to celebrate the center's opening. As James poured the drinks, Ben was already sketching ideas for their next project, a series of sustainable housing developments that would make green living accessible to more people. Alex pulled out his tablet, showing the latest data from their international projects. "The Singapore complex is outperforming all expectations," he reported. "And the Dubai project has already led to 3 similar commissions in the region. And the best part," Chris added, "is that they all want to incorporate our educational initiatives. The center's model is spreading globally." Catherine watched her sons with pride. At 17, they had accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime, yet they remained grounded, focused on using their talents to make a real difference in the world. "I've been thinking," James said, setting down his glass, "about what we've built here. Not just the buildings or the company, but this family. We've created something unique, something that combines professional excellence with personal connection. It's like sustainable development itself," Ben observed, looking up from his sketch. "Meeting present needs while ensuring a better future." "Speaking of the future," Alex interjected, "we've received our university acceptance letters." The parents sat up straighter, though they'd all known this moment was coming. The boys had applied to various programs, each aligned with their interests and talents. "Imperial College for Environmental Engineering," Alex announced proudly. "University College London for Architecture," Ben added with a grin. "And London School of Economics for Business and Sustainability," Chris concluded. "All in London," Catherine noted, trying to hide her relief. "We couldn't leave now," Chris explained. "Not with everything we're building here. Besides," Ben added, "we can continue working with the company while we study. The center is perfectly set up for that." James looked around at his family, at Catherine, who had raised their sons with such wisdom and care, at Alex, whose brilliant mind constantly pushed the boundaries of environmental innovation, at Ben, whose creative vision brought their dreams to life, and at Chris, whose practical approach kept them all working together smoothly. "You know," he said softly, "that night when I sat alone in this restaurant celebrating a business deal, I thought I had everything I could want. I had no idea what I was missing." Catherine reached for his hand across the table. "Sometimes the best foundations aren't the ones we plan, but the ones life surprises us with." The boys exchanged knowing looks, used to their parents' moments of sentiment by now, but they couldn't deny the truth of it. Their chance reunion had created something extraordinary, a family united by purpose, passion, and the desire to build a better world. As the evening drew to a close, they raised their glasses one final time. "To the future," James proposed. "To family," Catherine added. "To sustainable dreams," the boys chimed in together. The gentle guitar music played on, and through the restaurant's windows, they could see their new center standing proud against the London skyline, a beacon of innovation, education, and hope. But more than that, it was a symbol of their family's journey, a testament to the power of second chances and the extraordinary things that can happen when love, talent, and purpose come together at exactly the right moment. In the end, they had built more than sustainable buildings. They had built a sustainable future for themselves and for generations to come. And that, perhaps, was the greatest construction project of all.